Welcome to Sports Management Podcast, where you will hear interesting sports management professionals share their stories, experiences, and passion for the sports management industry. I am your host, Marcus Philipson. Welcome to episode 175 of Sports Management Podcast. Today's guest is Niall Couper, the CEO of Fair Game. Fair Game is a fast-growing band of clubs campaigning to improve football governance. We spoke about Fair Game and his partners, good governance in football, if Niall considers himself an activist, his 3 books, inventing the term sports washing, how clubs got affected by the pandemic, football clubs facing extinction, and much more. Niall Couper, welcome to the Sports Management Podcast.
Thank you very much, Marcus. It's wonderful to be here and to be crossing the oceans to talk to you in a virtual way.
Exactly. So excited to have you on this show. So you are the CEO of Fair Game. Can you tell us a little bit about what is that?
Yeah, sure, no problem. So Fair Game is a group of 34 men's professional football clubs here in England. And we kind of came together because we saw that football's, the way it operates in the UK, is broken and isn't really serving communities and clubs down the pyramid. And we wanted to look at see how we can change that and campaign for something better. So it's kind of the good guys of football saying, right, well, there is a different future. We want football to be a force for good. We want to make sure that fans are respected and that there's a real strong community spirit going through the game. And we were seeing threats to that. And so that's where we've kind of come together and look to challenge all of that and trying to improve it as much as we can. We work really closely with like academics and experts, because it's not just about pointing a finger and saying this is broken. It's about pointing a finger, saying it's broken, and this is how we fix it. And that's always the key. And then once we've got that, we then lobby and work really hard to try and make those changes actually happen. And that's the key for us.
I understand that. So football is the richest sport in UK, and yet club after club might face extinction. So you said it's broken. How is it possible, and what exactly is it that is broken?
A lot of them is broken. So the best thing to do is to think about the financial distribution and how that works. So each year, £3.19 billion goes to the Premier League to distribute how that's down the pyramid to see which clubs get what. Over the last 20 years, that distribution has got wider and wider between the divisions. And what happens as a consequence of that is that clubs lower down have got into a habit of spending more on players' wages than they actually receive in revenue. So you have clubs that become entirely dependent on an owner-benefactor model just to survive, which means when they die or when they get bored or whatever, that club is instantly at risk. And at the moment, 58% of the top 92 clubs in England are technically insolvent, which means they shouldn't really be existing as a business entity. They are losing money. So that is causing a real problem. And what happens, because those gaps are getting wider, is that things that you would see as benefiting long-term sustainability of the club, so like improving the stadium, connecting with your community, running community programs, things like that, running a decent football academy, or even a women's side, are all being cut in preference to try and get up the football pyramid. So they're spending more money on a third choice left back, their wages, than they are in long-term solutions. And that's causing a real stress throughout the pyramid. So we're getting a system where you've got a gambling culture that's existing, clubs that are running financially recklessly, and all the things that will make a club long-term sustainable being axed or cut back. So the health check of English football is pretty bleak, Marcus. And what we want to do is look to campaign and change that and change the direction of travel and make it fairer. So those are that's the real big issue. And it's quite fundamental, and it needs to really have a big overhaul for it to be better.
You mentioned the player salaries and that's a huge expense for the clubs. Why do they have to spend so much money on the salaries? Is it because they otherwise go to other leagues, and now also with Saudi Arabia entering this market with, huge salaries, do the clubs feel that in order to be competitive and get good players, they need to spend this huge amount of money on salaries?
Yeah, I mean, the problem you've got is that there is a very strong correlation between spend on players' wages and success on the pitch. And because of that, what happens in the English game is you get clubs wanting to spend more and more on players' wages to get to that next level. That has led to a spiral in player salaries because it keeps on going up. So until you have a way of capping those salaries, then you were kind of in a road to ruin. And throughout the game, when we've got effectively 5 professional divisions in England, between each of those divisions, to go progress up, you have to spend more on players' wages at the moment. So until that is addressed, then we're in a situation where it's just getting worse and worse and worse. And clubs are increasingly spending more money, particularly because what's happening is at the top end of the game, the money is staying there. So, and they're getting richer and richer and richer at the very top. So for all the other clubs who are actually relatively getting poorer, they are being encouraged to spend more to try and compete. And that becomes a financial nonsense. And that's a real big problem that we've got.
What can the clubs do to counter this financial mismanagement? And from Fair Game's side, how are you working with the 34 clubs to help in this area?
So the big thing for us is that we're at a real pivotal moment in the UK, is that there's a football governance bill going through our parliament. And that governance bill will look at how that distribution model works, along with a whole load of other things concerning financial controls and fan engagement and so on. And it's trying to create a better ecosystem for how football operates. And at Fair Game, we've been doing a lot of research into the problems that this financial situation currently delivers, and looking at developing those solutions, and then crucially working with politicians to try and make sure that this governance bill takes all of those issues into account and tries to deliver something that is worthwhile and really transforms the game and makes it much more secure going forward. So there's this whole lobbying process where our 34 clubs are working hard with their local politicians. And centrally Fair Game is developing all this research and messaging that hopefully plays out to politicians so they start listening and can make and add the right choices at the right time. And that's what's really important for us.
So you produce an annual index to show which are the best run clubs in the UK every year. So what are some factors that you base this on, and which clubs are in the top that you consider the best run clubs in the UK?
Okay, so for us, we look at 5 major criteria. So it's financial sustainability, which basically often comes down to financial transparency. So do we actually know what the club's doing? Good governance. So does it care about environmental standards, ethics? How's the board structure? Is it representative? How much input is there from various different areas? Then there's one on fan engagement. So obviously looking at how much does the club listen to the fans? So, if it's changing the badge, the colours, whatever, are they consulting with the fans, even on ticket prices? Community engagement's another one. And then the last one is equality standards. And equality standards is basically, how much do you care about your local community? How much do you look at the gender diversity, the racial makeup of what's happening in your area, and respect to that? So that's how we judge all the clubs. Certain clubs do really well on different criteria. Because we weight financial transparency quite highly, the clubs that did quite well were the ones that are actually listed on the stock exchange or a fan run. Because if you're listed on the stock exchange, then what that means is you've got a load of legal responsibility to be transparent. So unsurprisingly, Tottenham did quite well for that. But then the other ones that did well were the ones that are fan owned. So you've got clubs like, or have strong fan representation in their boards. So clubs like Cambridge United, Exeter City, AFC Wimbledon did very well as well. And that's because you see that kind of care about what it means to be community run, what it means to be sustainable. And those are the kind of clubs that we saw doing really well.
Mm. When I did research, I read also that Lincoln City FC was also a club that was considered doing pretty well, right?
Yeah, I mean, Lincoln City are a great club. In my mind, you've got with Liam Scully, who's their current CEO, probably one of the best CEOs in football, and they are trying to do things the right way. And if you look at Lincoln's progress, while it's not been spectacular, it's been steady. And they've come from being outside the football league to now being on the cusp of actually getting a chance of getting into the championship. It's slow, steady, sustainable progress, which really should be an exemplar to clubs throughout the English pyramid.
Yeah, why I ask is because I had Liam on the podcast a while back, and I was really, impressed by his work and everything that he's doing. So I was happy to see that Lincoln City was doing so well, also with regard on your standards.
Yeah, I mean, we speak to Lincoln a lot, and there's a lot to learn from that club. And yeah, so they are certainly an example that I think everybody should be looking to follow.
In Fair Game, you have 34 clubs, out of which is said one female club. Is that a female-only club?
Yeah, so we work with FC United of Manchester and their women's side. We've had relationships with them, and we're looking to expand a little bit more in that area as we go forward. I mean, the women's game is an area that we have tried to get involved in. Didn't necessarily do it brilliantly, and we're now working with our colleagues at Women in Football to look at how that might go forward in the future. The set of problems within the women's game are quite different to the ones in the men's game. Unfortunately, the women's game is rife with sexism and safeguarding issues, and just basically being treated as second-class citizens. And that culturally is a big issue that the women's game needs to deal with. Where on the men's side, it's much more about financial mismanagement and long-term cultural issues.
So you see different challenges on the men's side and the women's side?
Yeah, totally. I mean, that said, obviously you've still got increasingly clubs which are under the same name, they're in the same organisation. So, you've got a lot of clubs like Arsenal, Man United or Spurs or whatever that are in the top of the WSL and the Premier League. So there are still overarching governance issues. But when it comes down to the operations of the women's side and the men's side, there are significant differences.
If we think back a couple of years, there have been a lot of bumps. It's been COVID happened, obviously, cost of living going up. How is all of this affecting the clubs and their finances? And looking forward, do we feel like there is, light in the tunnel?
It's massively affecting the problems of the clubs. When we've seen an energy crisis where bills have gone up, and that has a massive impact, particularly on the smaller clubs. COVID definitely had an impact. And so there's lots of issues to deal with. Is there light at the end of the tunnel? That for us is the football governance bill. That is the hope we have that changes and transforms the system. At the moment in England, the Premier League is a de facto regulator. It's the one who distributes the money. It's the one that controls, funds a lot of the major campaign groups in England. They're the ones that the EFL have to basically put a begging bowl out to try and get any funding through. They are also responsible for providing the majority of the funding for the FA, the association. So their tentacles are everywhere. And obviously the Premier League's number one remit is looking after the well-being of its members, which are the 20 very rich owners of the Premier League football clubs. So the question to ask is, how much do they really care about what happens at Liam Scully's Lincoln City, at, Grimsby Town or at Carlisle United or so on, and all the other clubs lower down the pyramid? And the answer really is, it's not within their remit to be bothered. And yet they are the ones who hold the futures of those clubs in their hands because they control the distribution deal. So it's a really sorry state of affairs at the moment that the future of so many clubs and their communities is not actually within their hands.
So if we break down this government bill, what are they going to vote on, and how could that potentially affect the football in the UK?
Again, the major thing is going back to that football finances. So the bill covers a whole range of areas. It covers, fan engagement. It covers board structures, owners and directors test, how your finances are ordered. But ultimately, the biggest bit is the money, and you have to look at chasing the money. And it's that £3.19 billion that sits with the Premier League. So if this bill, and it's coming through today, if this bill can be amended to make sure that there are set parameters around what that distribution deal looks like, that could really transform how football operates. And when I mean those parameters, it's saying that deal must look at how it closes the gaps between the divisions, must look at how we incentivize well-run clubs, must look at how we make sure that our stadia is, up to date and up to scratch, encourages investment in academies, looks at compensation for player development. All of these things are things that could happen, and we could see amendments put down that would make that happen. So these next few weeks are absolutely fundamental to the future of English football.
Wow. It's an exciting time, but it's a lot that hangs on this decision then, it sounds like.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'd be looking at all those MPs. And obviously we in the UK, we live on this constituency-based system. So all those MPs who represent those particular areas with those clubs in start thinking, well, actually, if I want to be supportive of my own community, my own area, they need to think about voting for a regulator that has those powers to intervene and deliver that financial difference that we actually all want to see.
The government officials that are voting on this or are doing this, what type of expertise do they have in football?
This is a fantastic, MPs are a bit of a cross-section of society. So there are some MPs that are season ticket holders, that their whole family's been season ticket holders. They, they believe football, and there are others who are like, I know nothing about football. I'm only interested in other issues. So, that's how society is, and our parliament kind of reflects that. So it's about persuading those who are a little bit naive when it comes to football about the benefit it has to their communities. And it's about pleading to the passion and love of the game that those who have followed it for years have. So that's where we're at. So it's, we have to tailor what we say differently to whoever we're speaking to. But ultimately, it's about protecting communities and protecting those institutions that are so central to some of the towns and cities in our nation.
So it sounds like this will affect more the smaller clubs or community clubs more than what you said before with the Spurs and the Arsenals.
I mean, they will have an impact. I think the thing is that we're moving towards a situation where there is a football club and there is a football brand. And, the football club is the bit where, because people are often priced out of going to those big brand games, or their people aren't actually from their local community, whereas the football club is where people go to. It is where people feel a sense of belonging and an identity that's much more deeper than often exists with following a brand. And I think that's the difference. Are we looking at a football ecosystem that is about the communities, the clubs, the history, the traditions? Or are we looking at one that is equivalent to, I don't know, referring a bar of Milka to a bar of dairy milk? That's the kind of brand argument. That's where you're at, or what brand of shampoo you might take. It's that kind of level of connection. Whereas what we're saying is that having a club in your own town, your own city, that you go to, that you feel that you mix with people of that similar ilk, that's the stronger lower down the pyramid. And that's the bit that we really think is so important to protect.
Mm. So in a couple of weeks, there will have been a result. So what is the dream result for Niall Couper when this is voted on?
I really want to see that this financial measure comes in. There's been iterations and we've had significant success to be where we're at, but the financial one is the last one. And there's an issue about vested interest, and we don't want to see, people who are funded by the Premier League making the decisions on what this is happening, and that's obvious. But ultimately, it's about making sure that financial flow is fair and does encourage well-run clubs, does encourage clubs to invest in their communities, because it will make such a difference at a time when so many communities are really struggling. And yet there's this £3.19 billion worth of money that could actually transform so many cities and towns and communities across the nation. I think that's the really big bit that we're looking to try and push forward.
Yeah. So, I mean, when I read the three objectives of fair game and some things that you have talked about, all of this seems to be, what is in this bill now with good governance and financial sustainability, good community engagement and so forth. So it really ties back to what fair game wants to achieve.
Yeah, it's simple. I mean, we would go, who could argue against having a system that's financially sustainable, that has good governance and is embedded in its community? I mean, they are really core, simple values. And that's the bit that we want to see right at the heart of it. Unfortunately, there are some people who don't think like that. But that's where we need to try and change those attitudes and deliver something that is better and makes football that force for good that I think all the clubs of fair game and a majority of football fans would want to see.
Yeah. So how did you end up on this career path? When did you get interested in football? How did this interest start? And how has your career journey been like up until this point?
So, yeah, I mean, look, I'm a football fan. I was a sports journalist for 5 years. Then I became a campaigner. I was working for Amnesty International as head of media. But throughout all of that, I'm an AFC Wimbledon fan. So I was involved when Wimbledon saw its place, as we describe it, stolen and taken to a town in Buckinghamshire in 2002. I was involved in the kind of rebirth of the club back in Wimbledon, and being involved with, right at the heart of that and seeing the pain that fans can go through. And I think that was really instrumental. And then I was on the board once, and the second time I got elected onto the board was when there was another financial issue connected with the club. And I was determined to see, that what could Wimbledon do as its story to inspire other clubs and try and make a difference in the wider football community. And, I went and spoke to people in boardrooms, former journalists, fans, and so on, and they all came back to the governance of the game is broken and that clubs need to come together to try and change that. And that's where Fair Game was born. I was the founder. That's nearly 4 years ago. And now we're on the cusp of potentially delivering a new system that actually addresses all those concerns, all those issues that affected AFC Wimbledon, that affected so many other clubs. And we don't want to see that pain happen again. We want to see clubs feeling secure in their future. And that's where it all came from. But it's all bound to the hurt that I suffered. And it's no surprise that a lot of the people who volunteer and help Fair Game are people who follow those clubs or who believe that football can do so much good things in the community.
Yeah, and that's an important thing to point out also, that Fair Game is run by volunteers who have the passion and expertise in this.
Yeah, absolutely. So, we've got about 75 active volunteers at the moment, loads of other researchers, loads of partnerships with universities, and that's absolutely vital for us. Obviously, we'd love to have a philanthropist out there that wants to donate loads of money to Fair Game to make us that much more sustainable at our centre, because we're basically dependent on donations here and there. So anything that anybody out there wants to donate, they almost certainly can. It's no difficult. You just go onto our website, fairgameuk.org.uk, fairgameuk.org, sorry, and you'll find opportunities to help us. But it is, the reason why we have that many people is because it's a passionate cause that people believe in. We do see ourselves as being a really privileged situation to try and deliver that fairer future for football. Not many people have that opportunity. And, if you volunteer and help Fair Game, then you do.
And you mentioned AFC Wimbledon and what that club means to you. And you've also written 3 books on about the club, if I'm not mistaken. So why this, the passion for this club? Where did that start? And why did you decide to write these 3 books?
Yeah, well, I mean, for me, I was born in Wimbledon, so it's my local club. So that's where that one starts. And then on the books, yeah, um, his first one began because they're all through the eyes of the people involved. So it's all kind of like, what was their story? How do they feel at the time? It began because I did an alternative match day program in the year that Wimbledon was being proposed to move to Milton Keynes. And that program outsold the official program 3-1. But one of the articles was, looking through the eyes of a player about memorable moments. And, I started to get a few people coming in, and then loads and loads of people came in, and that kind of blossomed to become a book. And that was the first book. And then obviously the story of AFC Wimbledon has grown over the years. So I was asked to do another book 10 years later and a third book 10 years after that. So, and they're all of that same sort of story. So telling the inside story about how Wimbledon was formed, AFC Wimbledon was formed, as well as all the historical moments and key moments and key games and stuff like that. So it's a very insightful view into what is actually happening. It's not my view, it's other people's views, but all captured with all these great stories.
Hmm.
We buy all three.
Yes, of course. Is it on Amazon, or how do they?
You can get them on Amazon, so it's easy.
Amazon, that's easier. Yeah, perfect. Yeah, so looking at your career journey, you mentioned you were a journalist at The Independent and then worked for Amnesty International for several years, and also been a board member of Union of European Clubs. Those experiences that you have taken from these previous jobs, how do you feel like they help you now at Fair Game?
It's a passion passion for football and a passion for campaigning and a kind of idealistic view of making the world a better place. So those three things all combine. That's 100% where Fair Game in my mind sits. I want it to be different. I love taking on the big guys and standing up for the little people, if you like. That is the element of social justice is so important to me. It's, my raison d'etre. And I think that's the big thing that drives me on. So that's where all those three things all combine in a kind of beautiful place for Fair Game. And that's really where I'm keen to try and make that difference, because I love sport, I love football, but I also love social change, and I love delivering social impact. So those two things combine brilliantly.
That's beautiful. The word activist, I feel, gets a bad rap. Do you think about, people gluing themselves to the highway, stuff like that, throwing paint on paintings in museums? But I mean, there is also positive activism. And would you consider yourself a football activist?
It's hard not to, really. Yes, I am. I'm more of a campaigner, I think, than an activist. And that's probably because the word activist, like you say, is loaded. I'm a campaigner. I'm a social change campaigner, and football is the area I operate within. I'm that's my passion, and that's what I'm trying to do. I look at trying to bring people together that want to help Fair Game achieve its aims.
Two other fun facts that I found, which I want to see if those are true, that you were responsible for creating the word or the phrase sports washing. Is that right?
Yeah.
That's unbelievable. I have been, I studied sports management. That was like a big part of some of the classes that we went through. I've had, topics on this podcast that had that as the main topic. And now I'm talking to the inventor of the phrase sports washing.
Yeah, I'll slightly caveat that, not massively. So at Amnesty International, I'm a big champion of sport and human rights. And I was the head of media. And what I said to my team was, look, we need to popularize this. We need to make it like a phrase that everybody's kind of really important. And we were brainstorming it and coming out with ideas and concepts. And yes, it was my team. And I'll name the individual. Neil Durkin was the individual in my team who came out with the phrase sports washing. So it is him. You can trace it all back. And it was there through Amnesty. I set the task. He came out with the word. But that's where it came from, and then we started using that routinely, and that's where it is. So, Marcus, kind of true. I'm the person the word sport, I mean, might have come out somewhere else. The word sports washing exists because I set the task for it to be created.
That's fantastic. Wow. It's as I said, like now I hear it almost every day and in news and in everything. And then that you were part of the invention of that.
Yeah, totally. It's one thing I'm very proud of, to be honest, Marcus.
Yeah, I understand that. It's an important topic in not only in football, obviously, in sports at large. Now, when with with football World Cup and all of that, obviously it's a big part. But Olympics and it goes bigger than only football, of course.
Yeah, absolutely, Marcus.
The other one that I found was that you have an unhealthy love for 90s indie music.
Yes, that's totally true as well. Yeah. So I am, look, I went to uni during the early 90s, and therefore I am an absolute lover of Blur, Oasis, James, The Killers. Well, Killers aren't 90s, but like things like Prefab Sprout, God, Charlatans, Stone Roses, all of that. So I have a collection of T-shirts upstairs that must have every single indie band of any note. James, loads of brilliant bands. I could do very poor karaoke to a whole Britpop collection without any problems. I absolutely love indie music.
So do you have more T-shirts with the indie music or more football jerseys?
You know what? I actually have, football jerseys. I've got football T-shirts. So a lot of kind of, like the one I'm wearing now, it's got Fair Game written on it. So it's probably 50-50 split there. There is quite a lot. I mean, I've got loads of AFC Wimbledon tops going back decades, loads of kind of foreign tops, but then I've got a whole load of indie T-shirts. There's definitely a James, a Pulp, a Blur, Stone Roses, Blink-182, yeah, James, all that sort of stuff. There's loads of those T-shirts in there as well.
So is music and football your two big passions?
Well, yeah. Well, and look, and human rights. So politics and that sort of stuff, and actually social change. So there's another set of T-shirts which you haven't mentioned, Marcus. It's all the political ones. So there's political ones as well. So that's it. I don't wear it. I wear a lot of T-shirts, a lot of branded T-shirts, and if they're only ever going to fit into those three categories.
In your career, has there been any bumps on the road? And if so, how have you overcome them?
Bumps in the road. Well, Premier League's a big bump in the road because they're obviously not supportive of what Fair Game's trying to do. Then the biggest one is probably being on the board of a football club when the results are bad on the pitch, but you're delivering, you're seeing change behind the scenes, but the change behind the scenes that often takes 6 months or a year to trickle through to see the actual development of the policies that you're putting through. And because I'm quite a well-known face at AFC Wimbledon, when the results were bad, then as a fan-run club, you sit amongst the fans. My season ticket is amongst supporters, and I was getting lots and lots of online abuse, verbal abuse at grounds. I got threatened physically because the results were bad on the pitch, and I have no control of the results on the pitch. And I can guarantee you quite clearly, Marcus, that had I had control over results on the pitch, they would have been way worse. Because I'm a particularly appalling person when it comes to tactics and management of football clubs or football teams, and that's I've managed a Sunday league team, and people still moan at the fact I think I once played 6 left backs, which is clearly not a way to run any football team. Very strong on one side of the pitch, nothing on the middle. But yeah, so that was probably the worst bump I've had, and I had to quit because it became too toxic. And it's a really interesting one now, working with a lot of CEOs and a lot of managers and other board members. In that kind of social media toxicity that exists is really damaging for people's mental health. And that's one thing that I think people kind of are ignorant about, because you can kind of throw off an email or send a text or a tweet or Facebook message or something on LinkedIn or Instagram or whatever without actually realizing the consequence it has on the person who sees it. And I think that is definitely, I'd say, a bump in the road and a learning curve for me.
So that must have been so difficult that you are working for a club that you love, and you know you're making positive change, and then, okay, the sporting result was not what it was, and then you're getting threats and abuse when you know that, it's going in the right direction.
Yeah, it's difficult. Yeah, exactly that. And it was really painful. And it led to me not going to a couple of games. And I'm like, I'm a season ticket holder because it was so difficult, and that's a really painful situation to be in. What it made me realize is that happens to loads of other people and loads of other clubs when the results are bad on the pitch and they're trying to do great things off the pitch. To what happens, and that's that kind of bit of duty of care, because there are a lot of people that are trying to do things the right way. Not all owners and directors are bad, but it's difficult. It's really difficult.
So how did you move on from that? You said that you didn't attend all games, and then you had to stop being on the board for that reason as well. So how did you move on from that experience?
Yeah, it took time. I started going back to games. I got a lot of support from fellow board members and other fans and stuff like that. I still do a podcast with some other AFC women called The Same Old Wombles. And that gives me a bit of an outlet to talk about things. And also, I think offering support to other people on boards and stuff like that and trying to help in that situation, that really helps as well. So that's kind of how you move on. You do have to dust yourself down, but ultimately, I believe in what AFC Women was set up for. I believe in what Fair Game is set up for, and that really helps.
You follow the purpose.
I follow the purpose.
I love that. What's some advice that you have for people who want to work in the sports industry, or maybe specifically in the football industry?
Get a thick skin. It can be hard. Stay focused on what the vision and objectives are. It's like any business, really. What is that club trying to achieve? What is that organization trying to achieve? And make sure that remains at the heart of everything you do. And also remember that football clubs are central to their communities. So you're a custodian of a tradition. You're a custodian of decades of history. And that's really important. So that you're kind of grounded. And at the same time, trying to offer a bright new purpose and trying to get people engaged in what is a great sport and with a great infrastructure of communities. And that's one thing I'd say would be really central of it. And, have passion. Believe in the power of football.
I love that advice. I like also to ask a networking question. So who from your network do you think would be a good guest on this podcast? And then keeping in mind that Liam has already been on the podcast.
Yeah, I was going to say that. Liam Scully would be brilliant. From my network, who I think would be a great guest. Yeah, Mark Palios at Tranmere Rovers. He used to be the chief of the FA. Really passionate about a whole load of things. Definitely a good guy. The other one would be potentially Jason Stockwood at Grimsby Town. Another really good person. So there are a few others I could probably think of. You probably would, a couple of good journalists. Miguel Delaney, The Independent, another really good person to speak to.
Fantastic. Anything else that maybe I haven't asked or something you want to call out as final words?
No, I'd just say that, football can be a force for good. And I think hopefully everybody who listens into this pod, Marcus, can take part in that and really try and drive it forward wherever they live, whatever team they follow. And because it's such a unique sport with such a unique fan base and opportunities to do good. And so grasp it.
Definitely. I love what you're doing. And thank you so much for taking the time to be on Sports Management Podcast.
Thank you, Marcus. I'll speak to you soon.
Thank you for listening to the Sports Management Podcast. Please hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out on any upcoming episodes. Also, feel free to leave a comment about what you thought about this episode. If you want to get in contact with me, send an email to sportsmpodcast@gmail.com or hit me up on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram @sportsmpodcast.